Well, that riveting speech yesterday on race by Barack Obama continues to reverberate across the political spectrum. From the newspaper editorial pages to the internet to the campaign trail itself, Americans are digesting those powerful remarks, replaying them in their minds, and talking about Barack Obama. Hardball correspondent David Schuster reports.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Today, the reaction to Barack Obama's speech was strong. The Dallas Morning News, quote, "Has any major U.S. politician in modern times ever given a speech about race in America as unflinching, human, and ultimately hopeful as the one Barack Obama delivered yesterday?" According to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, quote, "It was stunning." The Philadelphia Inquirer, quote, "He spoke with such grace and candor about America's need to overcome racial divisions that his own political calculations seemed inconsequential." The conservative National Review Online, quote, "Eloquently written and at times moving." Conservative writer but Obama supporter Andrew Sullivan, quote, "This searing, nuanced, gut-wrenching, loyal, and deeply, deeply Christian speech is the most honest speech on race in America in my adult lifetime."
But the anger is real. It is powerful. And to simply wish it away, to condemn it without understanding its roots, only serves to widen the chasm of misunderstanding that exists between the races.
On YouTube, in the 24 hours after the speech, it had already become the #1 video of the week with more than 1 million hits.
If we simply retreat into our respective corners, we will never be able to come together and solve challenges like health care or education or the need to find good jobs for every American.
Senator Clinton, according to her spokesman today, saw excerpts and called it a good speech. At the White House today,
I haven't talked to the president about that speech.
There was some conservative criticism of Obama. Rush Limbaugh called the address disingenuous.
Some of you might think that this was a forerunner of an inauguration speech, or I've even heard somebody say it was the most important racial speech since Martin Luther King. That's a bunch of bunk. That's just white. This was a political speech in the state where the next primary is being held.
Obama was hoping to contain the public outrage over the hateful comments of his pastor Jeremiah Wright. But according to Republican pollster Whit Ayers, quote, "This is far and away the most damaging issue of the campaign for him, and his wonderful speech did nothing to make it go away." And Republican Congressman Peter King told Newsday, quote, "I think it's an obligation of any opponent to use this issue to make Reverend Wright a centerpiece of the campaign. Obama's speech was disappointing and shameful." What really matters, though, in a political campaign is what the voters think, especially in upcoming primary states like Pennsylvania. So the question is, did Barack Obama's speech have an impact, and if so, how? I'm David Schuster for Hardball in Washington.
Thank you, David Schuster. Pat Buchanan's an MSNBC political analyst, and Joe Madison's a talk show host on XM Radio. Joe, I want to ask you this. What do you think of Limbaugh's comments? What do you think of Peter King's comments? Do you think people just can't stand the fact that the guy gave a good speech?
I think they should put Rush Limbaugh and Jeremiah Wright in a ring and put boxing gloves on them, and then let whoever wins, determine the winner. I mean, it was an outstanding speech. What I don't understand is, what are white men afraid of? I mean, they have all the power. They have tremendous influence in this country. I can't believe that a single pastor of a relatively small church compared to some of the mega churches would be so threatening to white males in America.
How's that for a start?
Well, again, I don't think there's any. I don't think. First of all, I would never. I've never heard that kind of language in any church that I've attended. I said in any church that I've attended.
No, but let's talk about the one he attended.
Well, it was wrong, and Obama said so. I mean, what else do you want from the young man?
You ask me why white people are afraid of it. They don't like people that.
You mean they're afraid of that word, GD?
Patrick,
when probably invented it.
I'm just.
No, I don't think white folks are afraid of Reverend Wright. It's what Reverend Wright said, and Joe Madison described it. I've never heard that in any church, black or white, Catholic, Protestant, in my life.
Now, I do admit, I did hear it one time. It was Mayor Coleman Young, the late Mayor Coleman Young, said it at a church, and then he immediately asked for the preachers to pray for him.
I was in St. Louis, South St. Louis. I heard J.B. Stoner give a speech like that. You know who J.B. Stoner was?
I know who J.B. Stoner
J.B.,
is.
and he turned out later to have been somewhat maybe involved in the Birmingham bomber. I heard him talk about black people that way. Jeremiah White talked about white folks. Now,
but Pat, that's a little unfair because Jeremiah Wright, in all the years that I have known him, has never suggested that any white person be physically harmed in this country.
Let me make my point then. The point is that this affects nobody's afraid of Jeremiah Wright. It tells us something about Barack Obama, who for 20 years sat there and listened to these anti-American racist rants, never stood up, never denounced them, never criticized them. His speech was excellent. He was well written. It was very well delivered. It was a skillful political speech, Chris, because the objective was to change the subject from why I sat there and listened to Reverend Wright to America's responsibility for the real problems in the African-American community. He's got this behind him. He smartly moved today, get onto the war.
Yeah.
Now, he's got the African-American vote in Philly. He's got to get Altoona and Johnstown. And you don't go out there and tell those folks they haven't done enough for African Americans. Those are white folks, Joe, who don't run this country and don't run the world.
It's not that people worry about Jeremiah Wright. There's probably plenty of Jeremiah Wrights out there on both sides of this fight. They're worried, a lot of people like me were worried about what it said about Barack Obama.
Wait a minute,
and he answered that question.
Are you guys talking about the same black guy that carried Idaho? Are you talking about the same white guy that carried Wyoming? Are you the black guy that carried Wyoming? I'm suggesting to you that both of you need to go to black churches more often.
Well, look,
and I'll tell you why. Because
I don't want to hear that, Joe.
Well, first of all, if you go, you won't always hear it. Secondly, when I have been to black churches all my life, and I think been black a little longer than you have, just a little bit maybe,
right?
At least for let's say for this show, and I'm here to tell you, we do to ministers what everyone does. You may not directly confront the minister. You might, when you walk out and say, Reverend, I don't know if I like that speech, but you certainly do go home and discuss it. So for you to suggest that,
Joe, let me talk.
First of all, to suggest that for 20 years he didn't say a word, how does he know that?
He didn't. Why didn't he get up there and say, look?
How do you know that?
Well, because he didn't say it. He said, why didn't he say, I took Reverend Wright aside and I said, stop that filth and garbage, Reverend, or my child and my wife were walking out of this church. He didn't do it. He didn't stand up like a man. He slipped the punch and he got out of Philly and he's down there talking about the war. He did a smart thing.
And the church, the black church, particularly that one, is much more than Reverend Wright. I don't recall too many presidential candidates going after the Joneses when they said that black people couldn't vote white people.